You are listening to Leverage, the podcast about power, politics, and influence. I'm Kristal Taylor.
And I'm Breon Wells.
And we are back and welcome. And what a week it has been, twin.
What a year it has been in a week.
What a decade it has been in the last 3 days, right?
Yeah. And apparently the Supreme Court said, let's hark back centuries in 1 week and go ahead and snatch back things.
Snatch that thing back. The Supremes are not playing games, and they just disrespectful right now. They're utterly disrespectful. There are so many cases that the Supreme Court has dropped, not just this session, like this week alone, right? Landmark decisions. And we could not even pretend to tackle all of them. No one has that bandwidth, that energy, that mental stamina. We ain't got it. We don't got it. It's not gonna happen.
We don't have it in today, but we could, the way the Supreme Court did it, we almost have all of our season outlined just alone on the Supreme Court.
All 20
but
episodes.
We wouldn't do that to you all.
Right, all 20 episodes, courtesy of the Supremes. But today we're going to talk about two very special cases. One is Berger versus the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP, a lovely little voting rights case. And then the other, what's the other, twin? You want a drum roll?
Give me a drum roll. There it is. It is Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. AKA rollback of Roe v. Wade.
Rollback. We rolled back before Roe v. Wade. We rolled all the way back. We rolling on the river, rolling down the river. We gone. Rolling. It's over. We rolling. We pop lock and dropped history 50 years behind us. So there's that. I think there's so much to talk about with both of these cases. I think with the Berger case, though, because that is a bit more succinct and to the point. I think what's interesting in the Berger case is that it lets us know that in 2022, the year of our Lord, we are still out here fighting for voting rights. We are still out here trying to make the case that voting needs to be easy and accessible, that we don't need any additional layers of burden. And yet here we go with the Supremes and this latest ruling. I think what encourages me in this case is that it's the kind of case that basically says, hey, so yes, North Carolina tried to, in 2018, make this constitutional amendment requiring voter ID. So it's like a license, your passport, authorized, student or local kind of identification, right? If you don't have a license or a passport. North Carolina made an amendment that said, hey, let's get this voter ID. Let's not talk about the potential. I mean, we could call it the black tax. We could call it a Latino tax. We could call it the poor tax. We could call it all kind of taxes on access to the ballot by requiring somebody to have a photo identification with them. But this case, to me, Berger is interesting in that it didn't decide whether or not the voter ID itself was constitutional or not. It's just saying, well, state officials who want to engage in the process of defending this ongoing lawsuit, like there's a lawsuit 3 years in the work still happening in North Carolina state courts, right? And the Supreme Courts are now just saying like, well, y'all don't just have to rely on the Attorney General to defend the case. These state reps who say they have a vested interest in it, they're allowed to jump in and try and defend the merits of voter ID too. So, I mean, yes, this case is a reminder that we still fighting. We still fighting for voter rights. We still fighting for basic ballot access. And at the same time, it's not the kind of case that makes you feel like you want to throw up your hands, right? So there's a silver lining. Is that a silver lining?
We'll see. The fight continues because, I think, and before we hop into the politics of it, I mean, to your point, what is at play here is the North Carolina Constitution was amended to mandate voter ID. And of course, this was under the guise, if you are conservative leaning, of protecting against voter fraud. Funny thing, anybody remember those ballot harvesting measures that happened in self-same North Carolina on the Republican side? That was not a Democrat, was it, Twin? It was not.
Wasn't.
No,
but what they
wasn't.
say, a bit dog will holler, a bit dog will
Yeah,
holler.
yeah. And so then, what happened is in 2018, after that amendment was made, the state legislature came in with this law that then said photo IDs needs to be the way we implement new mandate that is on the books. And the NAACP sued the governor and sued the board. Basically these leaders, what we would call these legislative leaders, as being this violate really and do an undue burden disproportionately on Black and brown folks. Well, the problem is, and part of what I thought was interesting in the Supreme Court's litany of disappointing rulings this week, on this one in particular, is the fact that they wanted to be very, very particular that, yes, the state legislature, because the state legislature argument was the attorney general who would be representing them was someone who was, when he was in the state legislature, against and a opponent of this legislative piece that they have, is now sitting before the Supreme Court. So they should have a right to intervene, to have their own representation so that their argument could get its fullest weight. Okay, for the record, the attorney general has gone on the record saying, you all should have a seat at the table. Sure, you all should be able to make your little argument. Sorry, that's belittling, not make your little argument. He didn't say that, that's just me. But you can make said argument and represent your own
Make
views.
your little argument, whatever. Or
right,
whatever.
or whatever.
Do you. Do you.
But what ends up happening then is the court ruled that they do have, in fact, the right to intervene, which the attorney general was in agreement with. Right. In part, though, they said it was because the NAACP sued not the whole state legislature, but very specific actors, that being the governor and the board. So you're right. This does not necessarily mean that the law is in effect. It's still being held up. It's a preliminary injunction. It cannot be implemented. But this separates on whether the, Republicans can make this nefarious, this argument for their own bill that some would say is heinous, problematic, racist in its intent. It gives them the ability to have standing. The reason I caution on the silver lining question, Twin, is this. We have seen, I would say, even when we talk about this later case of Dobbs, we have seen that, yes, in the ideological debate and both sides being able to show up these things, that logic and the right thing for the country and pockets of society doesn't always bear out. So, it's a gamble. This is a gamble that no one knows where this could go. But we do know that elections have consequences. We do know that we have a Supreme Court that is heavily bent one way. And we'll delve into that in Roe v. Wade, the rollback of Roe v. Wade. But this does present a gamble while we're waiting for the ruling on whether this bill can proceed to be implemented.
Yeah, and I think, Twin, you bring up a really good point around just the political dynamic, right, that's taking place, especially with respect to the Supreme Court. Because for anybody who has forgotten, right, when Obama was still in office, he attempted to nominate Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. I mean, he nominated the man. So let me say he attempted. He nominated Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court And the Senate held that thing up. I mean, it just, nope.
And the Republicans parked that. They parked him right in that.
True.
Just sit.
They just like, no, we're just gonna sit you. We're just gonna sit you here because there's an election forthcoming, and the people need to be able to decide who should lead, and therefore who that leader should get to choose. And I mean, there's too much in limbo. If you allow this nomination to go through. Okay. So Merrick Garland, as we all know, was not successfully appointed to the Supreme Court. And yet, fast forward through history, and but her emails, Donald Trump became president. Okay. And 3 of the current 9 justices on the Supreme Court are ones that he appointed, right? You had Neil Gorsuch, you had Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Kavanaugh now, Kavanaugh ever, Kavanaugh. But I mean, it's wild to me because like when you talk about the political dynamic on the Supreme Court, which, oh, by the way, isn't supposed to be political, right? It isn't the Supreme Court supposed to be apolitical? Aren't judges supposed to be apolitical? Aren't they supposed to be able to put their personal beliefs to the side in order to adjudicate the cases before them? And yet, you know, in this case, and certainly in so many others that the court has released this session, especially in this week, this longest, longest decade of a week.
Right.
It's so clearly political, right? And I think the politics of moments like this really have profound implications for the policies that then spring forth, right?
Yeah. And Twin, before we shift into the power of it, I want to make a note on the politics to your point of this. Tim Moore, who is the North Carolina Speaker of the House, right? And one of the main ones that's making this argument, we deserve the right to have our say. He said the following quote that's worth unpacking. North Carolinians overwhelmingly support voter ID, and they deserve nothing less than the strongest representation from those who would uphold the will of the voters in our Constitution, not a tepid defense by an attorney general who has a record of opposing voter ID. Now, here's why I would say this quote belongs in our segment as we dissect the politics of this. There's a difference, and reading and hearing is real fundamental here. There's a difference between voter ID, which can come in many different forms, and photo ID, which is the thing in question here. It's whether photo IDs, which if you are, you know, someone who is Black or brown and has an inability financially to have gone, you know, this is why we're fighting to say, okay, look, it's a poll tax unless DMV, and even if DMV does provide for free, that's a heavy, hard lift to ensure that everybody gets to have this photo ID. But then on top of it, there's some complications if you are part of the LGBTQIA community. And when you have gone through a change or a transition, you know, what you used to look like versus how you look now, make it make sense in a space where it's even overall hostile to you. So the politics of this is, and this is why it's a gamble for it to even be argued in the Supreme Court, is let's be honest. Republicans tend to relish in the communications game. That's the politics side of it. Forget the policy, the perception of it. They tend to, and oftentimes Democrats don't always win the communications argument. And so if we don't acknowledge that there is a difference between general voter IDs versus photo IDs, that conflation matters in how interpretations may come down in the court.
And also, by the way, as a North Carolina voter, let me tell you, they verify your identification multiple times. Maybe not with your photo ID, but as soon as you check in, you show up, you sit down to the nice election worker, they ask you your name, they ask you your address, you know, like you have to, they do a little printout and everything where you have to then review the name and address. If there are any errors in the process, by the way, they're gonna hold you up and be like, no, the address that you said ain't the address that I see, or the name that you said is not the name that I see. But then after you go through this verification process, you actually have to sign what is effectively an affidavit saying under penalty of perjury, like I am providing true and accurate information about my identity. I'm not here representing nobody else. This is me. So it's not,
That's right.
It is also not like there is no process already in place to verify voters, to identify who is voting,
That's right.
to have this one-to-one correlation. And I think that's also one of the fallacies that, oh, well, if you don't have a photo ID, you're not going to know. Really? First, and not to cut you up, but can we just say, come on now, how hard we have to fight to get people to vote?
Right. But that's it right there, Twin. The politics of it is this: when you misleadingly say that overwhelmingly North Carolinians overwhelmingly support voter IDs, we need to remember that when we're talking about voting rights, since we're here, that white wealthy landowning men were the first ones who were considered their voice was credible. So that means we also need to ask the question, who are these North Carolinians that you decided to say they overwhelmingly support voter IDs? Now, we've already unpacked that there's a difference between voter IDs and photo IDs, which you can be for voter IDs and still have a problem with photo IDs because it could be discriminatory. So the devil is in the details on who are these, because often the same people who I guarantee you y'all didn't poll were the same people who had the problem accessing the photo IDs in the first place, and who y'all didn't call because some of these have housing insecurity or they're the unhoused. So what hotline did you what number did you call for them to be able to get this polling?
And what's your address of record?
Did you send it up? There it is.
What's your address of record?
So, I rate this 16 Pinocchios of lies and propaganda, pants on fire, I'm not going to say they're liars. I'm going to say there's a lot of untruths that are out there in these streets.
There is some inaccurate information. Some what was it before? Alternative facts.
Right.
Alternative facts. It's not a lie. These are alternative facts. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, Twin, the interesting part of this is we can't forget the power side of this, the policy. Oh, if only there was a strong federal legislation like the Voting Rights Act that could maybe it's behind this chair over here. Can you find
the
it?
Voting Rights Act, the Congress really could, Congress could super duper enact consistent and strong and stable voting. We used to have that strong protection. We used to have some strong protection.
Speaking of the
and
Supreme,
then what happened? The Supreme.
It was like 2013. That's right. They struck it down. That's right. They struck it down.
Because we don't apparently really need voting rights.
Because we had a Black president. Remember that bit? And so it's post-racial.
America.
You know what, Twin? Did you know you live in a post-racial society? Did you know? Go on out and be the full you with all of the credit report worthiness that you desire in your heart.
Oh my God.
You can imagine you're at the same space as a white man now. Did you know
what's
that,
amazing? In a post-racial society, I'm sure the things that happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, need the list go on, we wouldn't have to, worry about those things, right? In a post-racial society, right? Like the wealth gap in a post-racial society, the wealth gap wouldn't be in existence, right? Because we're post-racial, right? Everybody's treated the same. Everybody's treated equally. It's all fair. We post-racial.
That's right. That was the argument that was made in 2013. How is it faring for us now? And so the policy side of this is the onus was put since 2013 on Congress, because that's how our system works. The Supreme Court, when they strike down or say that a law or parts of a law is unconstitutional, and they said that of section 4B, of the Voting Rights Act, which rendered section 5, which was the pre-clearance, it rendered that powerless, and instantly, not almost immediately you saw states like Texas and North Carolina and all of those in the South start to put
Georgia.
these oppressive, Georgia, that's right, you had something in your throat. Did you clear it?
It's in my throat. That's
okay. Got it. Yeah. It brought to bear those heinous, wicked, oppressive access to the ballot box, anti-access to the ballot box, tools that we see today, including what brings us to Berger et al. And so the time has always been right. And here's where the slight indictment shifts to the Democrats, twin, in my opinion. This is just Breon's opinion. We have a Democrat in the White House. We have a Democrat Democrats run the House right now. And the Democrats run the Senate in as much as it's 50-50 with Kamala Harris being the one to break the tie, the vice president, right? And I thought that voting rights was on the ballot. And then when it came time for us to produce legislation for the current president to sign, we still don't have a remedy for the 2013 gutting of the Voting Rights Act.
Well, I mean, some people would like to throw Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema under the bus as the only culprits.
Yeah, and there's 6 others that would conveniently hide behind and let them get the spotlight. But let's also talk about Joe Manchin did not just appear. Democrats gave him leadership. Democrats continue to reward, and I will say this, not a fan of Joe, particularly Joe Manchin's politics, but shout out to him for his consistency. He's been consistently showing that he would, waffle and maybe be Republican in identity or, maybe anti-Democrat. I don't know which way you want to call it.
A rhino. Would he be a dino? A Democrat in name only? A dino?
A dino? Oh my, But he's been consistent about it, and yet all of his prior attempts that did not just start with this Congress have been met with rewards by his Senate Democrat colleagues as I guess maybe their strategy was, given his propensity to lean almost too far right, if we give him some space and some power, it'll incentivize him to stay. How's that working out for y'all?
It's like those corporations who have employees who should be fired, who should be let go, who not really producing. They're not doing what you need them to do. And yet, when they threaten to quit, you're like, oh no, let's create a package. Let's create a new role. Let's give them a promotion. Let's make them stay because we need them. It's the optics of needing them. And that's one of the things that I think challenges the Democratic Party, because to be clear, there is nobody in leadership who doesn't know that Manchin is a whiff waffle, that he's a flip-flopper, that he does what's convenient, but also that he acts in accordance with what you would expect a Democrat from West Virginia to act like. Right? So it's like there is no illusion about who he is, but the Democrats, being the big tent party that they profess to be, they don't want to make the mistake of alienating those centrists. Oh, those centrists. The Democrat Party works hard for the centrist votes, So I don't think it's any accident that Joe Manchin has not only been empowered the way he has, but that he's tenured. He ain't going nowhere. He ain't going nowhere. I mean, unless his constituents do something different, which goes into the influence. Like, how do you then faced with any of the cases, right, that we're talking about today, faced with legislation that's been struck down, legislation that's been kicked back to the states. What is it, twin, that people should do? What can they do to have their voice heard, their opinions addressed, their concerns redressed in a situation like this?
I think since we've outlined that the politics of it is always in politics about perception and appetite, right? And we've already said that there has been for some reason, a lack of appetite and conviction that the Voting Rights Act needs to be restored to its fullest measure, full stop. And we've indicated that the power is the restoration of the Voting Rights Act. That's the policy piece. Policy is power. That is what needs to be restored. I think that, folks need to remember that access to the ballot box is a core tenet. That is one of the non-negotiables. As we build these agendas and we're talking about environmental justice and we're talking about all these other things, all of that is for naught if you don't have access to the ballot box. So pressure needs to be put on Congress again to remind them that just because they tried before at the top of this Congress to try to do voting rights, and for a whole host of reasons, mostly Democrat.
You got that cold, that tickle.
Got that little tickle. Let me. All right, I think I'm back. I think I'm back now. If that has been, a rough road and a tall task to climb, that does not absolve Congress of their duty. Particularly these Democrats. Y'all was out there during this pandemic telling Black and brown folks to come out like dogs in heat to this ballot bowl and come this access to the ballot box. You need to make sure then that you go down swinging. Like that includes this uncomfortable conversation about the filibuster. Come on around here. That conversation about the filibuster is disingenuous to continue to tell segments of this population that have been marginalized that they need to come out and vote for you, and then you do anything less than your all after you ask them to bring their all to the ballot box. So the influence part comes in. We need to stop waiting for Congress to get their act together, and we need to be very prescriptive in these streets and let them know that their job is on the line if they don't figure it out. They figured out a way in a pandemic to go ahead and make sure that they were in everyone's faces and telling us to get in that line. It's despite social distancing, where there's a will, there's a way. And just because I feel tad bit messy, I do want to say that when we talk later in future episodes about the gun violence and gun control, Congress in a matter of weeks and literally in 1 week went ahead and hurried up and passed some piece of legislation. Now the effectiveness and the, whether it was written well is a whole nother thing, but they quickly galvanized around and produced something. So you can do it when you want to. It's just we the people got to turn all the lights on and start letting people know that these elections are always parent-teacher conferences, and you can find yourself sitting outside of the system if you don't do what's right by us, until you do right by me. You know what I mean?
Do right by me. And oh, by the way, shameless plug, as we talk about elections and the amount of accountability that can come down with them. Oh, look, 2022 is a major midterm year. So not only are all 435 seats in the House of Representatives up for election, we have about a third of the Senate.
A third of the Senate.
We have about 20 some gubernatorial seats, right?
Yep.
Nationwide are up for election. Let's not talk about every single state House of Representatives, every single state Senate. Y'all
except
got
except for Virginia and New Jersey.
Virginia and New Jersey.
We do the off year.
Y'all do the off because y'all want to be special. But those seats are up. We got tons of mayoral races, county officials, secretaries of states, labor commission. People get hype about the presidential election year because that's what's big and shiny. But the reality is we have opportunities every year, depending on where you live, right? If it's an off year or an on year. But there are opportunities every single year to show up to the polls and tell these people through your vote whether they're doing a good job or not. And guess what? Voting is like a gateway drug. That's the bare minimum. It gets you to the civic engagement process. But once these people have been elected into office, it is our job to stay on top of them, to supervise our employees. right? Don't they work for us? Don't elected officials, aren't elected and appointed officials supposed to be stewards of the public trust? Don't they work for us? Then we need to stay on top of them. Stay in their faces, go to the meetings, learn what they're talking about, show up, write letters, tweet, call to office, whatever it takes. Because the reality is, like, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And when we just only show up and barely show up, right? So presidentially, we show up, about 67% of the voting population will do presidential. And then in midterms, in the midterms and down ballot, we see significant decreases in voter participation. That's the baseline. That is the baseline. It's like civic engagement is about a lifestyle. It's about an identity. It's not just a thing to do. It's not just an event. Like civic engagement, honestly, for as much energy and effort that we put into it, this stuff really needs to become as mundane and as commonplace as scrolling through our social media feeds. Yep. Like we like to treat it like it's the Super Bowl, but it's not. It's like paying my bills. Just like making sure, like, oh, did my child do their homework? Okay, let me check over it. Let me make sure you're doing the right thing, and then course correct as you need to. You are listening to Leverage, the podcast about power, politics, and influence. I'm Kristal Hyde Taylor.
And I'm Breon Wells.